The Kethri ship docked with the GSS Unity at exactly 1400 hours. Park Tae-sung stood in the arrival bay with the rest of the welcome team, his hands clasped behind his back. He had studied the Kethri for months. He knew their language, their customs, and their history. But knowing something from reports was different from seeing it with his own eyes. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. The first Kethri stepped through, and Tae-sung felt his breath catch. They were tall and slender, with pale blue-gray skin that seemed to glow under the ship's lights. Their movements were graceful, almost like dancers. Elder Knox led the delegation, his robes flowing behind him like water. Tae-sung counted 7 delegates in total. 6 of them walked together in a tight group, speaking softly among themselves, but the 7th walked alone, a few steps behind the others. She was a young female, dressed in a high-collared uniform that covered her from chin to wrist. While the others held their heads high, she kept her gaze lowered. Captain Yoon stepped forward to greet Elder Knox. The 2 leaders exchanged formal words of welcome. Tae-sung barely listened. His eyes kept drifting to the young female at the back. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. When she finally looked up, he saw her face clearly for the first time. She had the same blue-gray skin as the others, but her features were different. Delicate ridges ran along her forehead, curved down her cheeks, and disappeared beneath her collar. The patterns were intricate, like the branches of winter trees or the paths of rivers seen from high above. Her eyes were large and dark, filled with silver flecks that caught the light. She was striking. Tae-sung did not understand why she stood apart from the others. The welcome ceremony was brief. Captain Yoon led the delegation toward the conference rooms, and Tae-sung fell into step beside Kim Yuna, the ship's doctor. "Did you see her?" he asked quietly. Yuna nodded. "The one in the back. She looks sad." "Not sad," Tae-sung said. "Careful. Like she is trying not to be noticed." They reached the main corridor, and Elder Knox stopped to introduce his team. He named each delegate with pride, describing their roles and achievements. When he reached the young female, his tone changed. It became shorter, more formal. "This is Vela," he said. "She serves as translator and assistant." Vela bowed her head. "I am honored to be here," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. She spoke perfect standard with barely any accent. Tae-sung smiled at her. "Welcome aboard, Vela. I am Park Tae-sung, Cultural Liaison. I look forward to working with you." Vela's eyes widened slightly, as if she had not expected him to address her directly. She bowed again, but said nothing more. The delegation continued down the corridor. Tae-sung noticed that Elder Knox positioned himself between Vela and the human crew, gently guiding her away from the center of the group. It was subtle, but it was clear. He was keeping her in the background. The first day passed quickly. There were tours of the ship, formal introductions, and the beginning of treaty discussions. Tae-sung sat in on every meeting, taking notes and offering cultural insights when needed. Vela translated flawlessly, her voice steady and professional. She never stumbled over a word or paused to search for meaning. She was clearly brilliant at her work, but she never spoke unless spoken to. She never offered her own thoughts or opinions. And whenever there was a break in the meetings, she retreated to the corner of the room, as far from the others as possible. That evening, Captain Yoon hosted a welcome dinner in the main hall. Long tables were set with food from both Earth and the Kethri homeworld. The delegates mingled with the human crew, sharing stories and laughter. It was exactly the kind of event Tae-sung loved. He moved through the crowd, introducing himself to each Kethri, learning their names and interests. But when he looked for Vela, he found her at the far end of the hall. She sat alone at a small table near the wall, eating in silence. The other Kethri had not invited her to join them. The humans had not approached her either, perhaps sensing that she wished to be left alone. Tae-sung started to walk toward her, but Elder Knox appeared at his side. "Mr. Park," the elder said warmly, "I must tell you how impressed I am with your knowledge of our language. Your accent is nearly perfect." Tae-sung smiled and thanked him, but his eyes kept drifting to Vela. She was watching the room with a strange expression. It was not anger or sadness. It was something more like acceptance, as if this was exactly what she had expected. "Vela seems very skilled," Tae-sung said carefully. "She must be valuable to your delegation." Elder Knox's smile flickered. "She is competent," he agreed. "We are fortunate to have her services." It was a strange way to speak about a colleague. Competent, services, as if she were a tool rather than a person. The dinner continued late into the evening. Tae-sung spoke with many of the Kethri, learning about their world and their hopes for the treaty. But his mind kept returning to Vela. She left early, slipping out of the hall without saying goodbye to anyone. No one seemed to notice her go. Later that night, Tae-sung sat in his quarters and reviewed his notes. He had learned much about the Kethri today, but not the thing he most wanted to understand. Why was Vela treated differently? Why did the others keep their distance from her? Why did she hide herself beneath that high collar? He pulled up the cultural database and began to search. Kethri society, Kethri customs, Kethri standards of beauty. He read for over an hour. When he finally closed the files, he sat in silence for a long time. Now he understood, and understanding made him angry. On the Kethri homeworld, smooth skin was considered beautiful. Those with ridge patterns were seen as flawed, marked, ugly. The more prominent the ridges, the greater the flaw. And Vela's ridges were not just prominent. They were elaborate, covering much of her face and neck. In the eyes of her people, she was damaged beyond repair. Tae-sung thought of the way she stood apart from the others, the way she hid herself, the way no one spoke to her unless they needed something from her. She had been treated this way her entire life, and she had come to believe it was what she deserved. He turned off his console and stared out the window at the stars. Tomorrow he would see Vela again. He did not know yet what he would say or do. But he knew one thing for certain. He would not look away from her. He would not treat her as less than anyone else. And if he could find a way to show her the truth, he would. Her ridges were not ugly. They were remarkable. She just did not know it yet. The first week of negotiations moved quickly. Every morning, the delegates gathered in the main conference room to discuss trade routes, resource sharing, and mutual defense agreements. Every afternoon, they broke into smaller groups to work on specific details, and through all of it, Vela translated. Tae-sung watched her work with growing admiration. She did not simply change words from one language to another. She captured tone, meaning, and feeling. When Elder Knox spoke with careful diplomacy, her translation carried the same weight. When Captain Yoon made a joke, she found a way to make the Kethri laugh. She was not just a translator. She was a bridge between two worlds. On the third day, Tae-sung was assigned to work with her directly. They sat together in a small office, reviewing documents that needed to be translated for both sides. Vela kept her eyes on her work, rarely looking up. "You speak 7 languages," Tae-sung said. "That is impressive." Vela's fingers paused over her console. 8, she corrected quietly. "I learned Terran Standard last year." 8 languages, he repeated. "How did you learn so many?" She was silent for a moment. "I had much time alone when I was young. Books were my companions." Tae-sung heard the loneliness in her words, but he did not push. Instead, he asked about the languages themselves. Which ones were hardest? Which ones she loved most? Slowly, carefully, Vela began to answer. Her voice was still soft, but some of the tension left her shoulders. They worked together every day that week. Tae-sung made sure to treat her the same way he treated everyone else. He asked her opinion on translations. He thanked her for her help. He made small jokes that sometimes earned a brief smile. And he never, not once, looked at her ridges with anything but normal attention. It was not easy for her to accept. When he asked her thoughts on a difficult passage, she hesitated, as if waiting for him to take back the question. When he complimented her work, she looked away, unsure how to respond. She was not used to being treated as an equal. On the 5th day, Kim Yuna joined Tae-sung for lunch in the medical bay. "I spoke with Vela yesterday," Yuna said. "She came in for a routine health check." "How is she?" Yuna frowned. "Physically, she is fine, but she asked me something strange. She wanted to know if there were quarters available far from the other Kethri. She said she did not want to disturb them." Tae-sung set down his cup. "She wanted to be away from her own people?" "She seemed relieved when I told her we had private rooms available." Yuna shook her head. "I do not understand their culture. She is clearly brilliant. Why do they treat her like she is invisible?" Tae-sung told her what he had learned about Kethri beauty standards. Yuna listened with growing anger. "That is ridiculous," she said. "Those patterns on her skin are beautiful. They look like artwork." "Humans see it that way," Tae-sung agreed. "But she has been taught her whole life that they are ugly. She believes it." Yuna was quiet for a moment. "Then we need to show her the truth." That afternoon, Tae-sung returned to the small office to continue his work with Vela. He found her standing by the window, looking out at the stars. She turned when he entered, and for just a moment, the light caught her ridges. They seemed to glow, delicate and intricate like frost on glass. She quickly moved away from the window, returning to her seat. "I apologize," she said. "I should not have been standing idle." "You do not need to apologize for looking at stars," Tae-sung said gently. He sat across from her. "Do you miss your home?" Vela considered the question. "I miss the sky," she said. "On my world, the nights are very dark. The stars are like scattered jewels." She paused. "But I do not miss everything." He understood what she meant. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tae-sung noticed something. When Vela reached for a file, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing more of the ridge patterns running down her wrist. She saw him look and quickly pulled her sleeve down. "Do they go all the way down your arms?" he asked. His voice was curious, not mocking. Vela stiffened. "Yes," she said quietly. "And my back. And my legs." She looked away. "I am sorry. I know they are unpleasant to see." "Why would they be unpleasant?" She stared at him as if he had asked why water was wet. "Because they are markings, flaws. On my world, children are taught that those with too many ridges are—" She stopped. "It does not matter." "It matters to me," Tae-sung said. "I want to understand." Vela was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We are called the marked ones. We are not chosen for important work. We are not considered for leadership or partnership. We are tolerated because we can be useful, but we are never truly wanted." She looked down at her hands. "I am very lucky to be on this mission. Elder Knox allowed it because I am the best translator, but I must stay in the background. I must not draw attention to myself. I must not make others uncomfortable." Tae-sung felt a cold anger building in his chest. "And you have accepted this? You believe you deserve to be hidden?" "It is not about what I deserve," Vela said. "It is simply what is true." He wanted to argue with her. He wanted to tell her that her culture was wrong, that her ridges were not flaws but wonders. But he knew that words alone would not change years of pain. She would not believe him. Not yet. Instead, he picked up his console and opened a folder of images he had saved. "I want to show you something," he said. "These are paintings from Earth. They are very old and very famous." Vela looked at the screen. The first image was a portrait of a woman with a scar running down her cheek. The second was a man with a birthmark covering half his face. The third was a dancer with burns on her arms. "These are considered beautiful?" Vela asked. "These are considered masterpieces," Taesung said. "On Earth, we do not believe that beauty means being the same as everyone else. We believe that the things that make us different are often the things that make us remarkable." Vela studied the paintings for a long moment. Her expression was confused, almost pained. "I do not understand your people," she said finally. Taesung smiled. "Maybe not yet, but you have time to learn." That evening, Vela walked back to her quarters alone. She passed a mirror in the corridor and stopped. For a moment, she looked at her reflection. Her eyes traced the ridges on her face, the patterns she had hated since childhood. Remarkable. She shook her head and walked on. The human was kind, but he did not know what he was saying. He could not see her the way her own people did. But as she lay in her bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she could not stop thinking about those paintings. Humans had looked at scars and burns and marks and seen beauty. What if they could look at her the same way? It was a dangerous thought. Hope had hurt her before, but for the first time in many years, she could not make it go away. The second week began with a small change. When Taesung entered the conference room each morning, he made sure to greet Vela by name. It was a simple thing, but it mattered. On the first day, she looked surprised. On the second day, she nodded in return. By the third day, she almost smiled. He began to include her in conversations beyond her translation work. When Elder Knox made a point about Kethri trade customs, Taesung would turn to Vela and ask for her thoughts. At first, she gave short, careful answers. But as the days passed, she began to share more. She had opinions, insights, and ideas that the other delegates never asked about. She simply had never been given the chance to speak. The other humans noticed what Taesung was doing and followed his lead. Lieutenant Choi asked Vela about her favorite Kethri foods. Ensign Park wanted to know about Kethri music. Even Captain Yoon, busy as she was, took a moment to compliment Vela on her translation of a particularly difficult speech. Vela did not know how to respond to this attention. She was not used to being seen as a person rather than a tool. She kept waiting for the kindness to stop, for the humans to grow tired of her and return her to the background where she belonged. But the kindness did not stop. Kim Yuna invited Vela to eat lunch in the medical bay. The first time, Vela hesitated at the door for nearly a minute before entering. She sat stiffly in her chair, barely eating, as if she expected to be asked to leave at any moment. But Yuna just talked to her like a friend. She asked about Vela's childhood, her studies, her dreams. "I wanted to see the oceans of Earth," Vela admitted. "I have seen images, so much water, all in one place. On my world, water is precious. We do not have seas." "When the mission is over, you should visit," Yuna said. "I grew up near the coast. The sound of the waves is like nothing else." Vela looked down at her food. "I do not think I will have that chance. When this mission ends, I will return home and resume my regular duties." "What are your regular duties?" "I translate documents, technical manuals, trade agreements, that sort of thing. I work alone in a small office." She paused. "It is good work. I am grateful for it." Yuna heard what she did not say. The work was lonely. The office was a place to hide her. But it was all she had been allowed. Later that day, Yuna told Taesung about the conversation. "She has never seen an ocean," Yuna said. "She has never been anywhere. They keep her locked away." Taesung nodded slowly. "Then we show her what she has missed." That evening, he brought Vela to the ship's observation deck. It was a large room with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, showing the stars in every direction. Vela stepped inside and stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "I have never seen so much space," she whispered. They stood together in silence, watching the stars drift past. Tae-sung did not try to fill the quiet with words. He simply let her look, let her feel something bigger than herself. After a while, Vela spoke. "On my world, the marked ones are not taken to places like this. We are kept inside, away from view. I spent most of my childhood in small rooms." She turned to him. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve to see it," he said simply. She did not know how to answer that. She turned back to the stars, and he saw something in her eyes that might have been tears. The next few days were full of small kindnesses. Tae-sung shared music from Earth, old songs that made Vela tap her fingers without realizing it. Yuna brought her treats from the kitchen, explaining each one and laughing when Vela made faces at the strange flavors. Lieutenant Choi taught her a simple card game that the crew played in the evenings. Vela began to change. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little louder. She laughed more easily, though she always covered her mouth with her hand, as if she was not supposed to be heard. But the change did not go unnoticed. On the 10th day, Vela was walking with Tae-sung in the corridor when Elder Knox appeared. He looked at the two of them standing together, and his expression grew cold. "Vela," he said. "A word." She followed him to a quiet corner. Tae-sung could not hear what was said, but he saw Vela's shoulders drop. He saw her bow her head. When she returned, her face was calm, but her eyes were dull. "I must apologize," she said quietly. "I have been too familiar with you and the other humans. It was inappropriate of me. I will maintain proper distance from now on." Tae-sung felt anger rise in his chest. "What did he say to you?" "He reminded me of my place." She tried to smile. "He is right. I forgot myself. I am sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for." "I do," she said. "You have been kind to me, kinder than anyone has ever been. But I cannot let myself forget what I am. If I do, it will only hurt more when this mission ends and everything returns to normal." She walked away before he could answer. He watched her go, his hands clenched at his sides. That night, Vela stood in front of the mirror in her quarters. She had been doing this more often lately, looking at herself and trying to see what the humans saw. But tonight, Elder Knox's words echoed in her mind. "You are here to work, not to make friends. Do not embarrass us by pretending to be something you are not." She reached up and touched the ridges on her cheek. They were deep, complex, impossible to hide completely. She had tried everything when she was young. Makeup, creams, even surgery. Nothing worked. The ridges were part of her, woven into her skin like roots into soil. She let her hand drop and turned away from the mirror. The humans were kind, but kindness did not change the truth. She was marked. She would always be marked. And when she returned home, she would once again be invisible. Still, as she lay down to sleep, she thought of the observation deck. She thought of the stars and the music and the card games and the laughter. She thought of Tae-sung looking at her like she was just another person, not a flaw to be hidden. For a little while, she had felt what it was like to be seen. Even if it could not last, she was grateful for that. In his own quarters, Tae-sung sat at his console and stared at nothing. He thought about Vela's face when she came back from speaking with Elder Knox. The light that had been growing in her eyes was gone. He could not force her to believe in herself. He could not make her people change their ways. But he could keep showing her what he saw when he looked at her. Not a flaw, not a mistake, a person worth knowing. He would not give up on her. No matter how many times she was told to hide herself, he would keep seeing her. And maybe, someday, she would learn to see herself too. The reception was held on the 15th day. It was meant to celebrate the progress of negotiations, which had gone better than anyone expected. The treaty was nearly complete. Soon, humans and Kethri would be allies, trading partners and friends. The main hall was decorated with banners from both worlds. Tables were covered with food and drinks. Music played softly in the background, a mix of human and Kethri melodies. The delegates gathered in their finest clothes, talking and laughing and toasting to the future. Vela stood near the back of the room. She wore her most formal uniform, the one with the highest collar. It covered her from chin to toe, hiding every ridge except the ones on her face, which she had tried to soften with careful lighting and positioning. She kept her back to the wall and her eyes on the floor. She did not want to be here. Receptions were dangerous. Too many people, too many eyes. But Elder Knox had required her presence. She was still the translator, and there might be speeches that needed her skills. Across the room, Tai Sung watched her. He saw the way she pressed herself into the shadows, trying to disappear. He saw the way the other Kethri moved around her, never quite looking at her, never including her in their circles. He started to walk toward her, but Captain Yoon called him over to meet a Kethri trade minister. By the time he finished the conversation, Vela had moved to another corner. He tried again, but Elder Knox intercepted him with questions about human customs. The evening passed in a blur of diplomatic small talk. Then the accident happened. A young human ensign was carrying a tray of drinks across the room. He did not see Vela standing near the wall. He turned too quickly and collided with her, knocking the tray from his hands. Glasses shattered on the floor. Wine splashed across Vela's uniform. "I am so sorry," the ensign said, his face red with embarrassment. He reached out to help her. Vela stepped back. "It is nothing," she said quickly. "Please do not worry." But the ensign was already grabbing napkins, trying to help her clean the wine from her collar. In his rush, he pulled too hard on the fabric. There was a tearing sound, and the high collar ripped away from the uniform. Vela froze. Her neck was exposed. The ridge patterns that she had hidden for so long were now visible for everyone to see. They ran down her throat in delicate spirals, spreading across her collarbone and disappearing beneath what remained of her uniform. They were more extensive than anyone had realized, intricate and beautiful and impossible to ignore. The room went quiet. The Kethri delegates looked away. One of them made a soft sound of discomfort. Another muttered something that might have been pity or disgust. Elder Knox closed his eyes for a moment, his expression pained. Vela stood perfectly still. Her face was empty, but her hands were shaking. She looked like an animal caught in a trap, unable to run, unable to hide. Tae-sung moved before he could think. He crossed the room in quick strides and stopped directly in front of her. He did not look away from her face. He did not flinch at the sight of her ridges. "Vela," he said clearly. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Those patterns," he said, "they are beautiful." The room went even more silent. The Kethri stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Vela stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. "I do not," she started. "I mean it," Tae-sung said. He stepped closer. "On Earth, we have a word for things like this. Things that are unique, that cannot be copied or repeated. We call them art." Vela's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kim Yuna stepped forward from the crowd. "He is right," she said. Her voice was calm and professional, the voice of a doctor speaking facts. "I have studied Kethri biology. Those ridge patterns are a sign of genetic diversity and strength. They are not a flaw. They are a gift." Other humans began to nod. Lieutenant Choi spoke up. "I have seen those patterns since the first day, And I thought they were amazing, like circuits of light. Like rivers on a map, Ensign Park added. Like frost on a window, another crew member said. One by one, the humans spoke. They were not being polite. They were not trying to make Vela feel better. They were simply telling the truth as they saw it. To them, her ridges were not ugly. They were wondrous. Vela looked around the room, her eyes moving from face to face. She saw no mockery, no pity, no disgust. She saw only honesty. These humans truly believed what they were saying. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but more followed. I do not understand, she whispered. Tae-sung reached out and took her hand. It was a bold move, one that might have been inappropriate in Kethri culture. But he did not care. You do not have to understand right now, he said. You just have to hear it. You are not ugly, Vela. You never were. The people who told you that were wrong. She looked down at his hand holding hers. She looked up at his face. She saw no lies there, no hidden cruelty. He meant every word. Behind them, Elder Knox watched the scene with an expression that was hard to read. He saw his young translator standing in the center of the room, her deepest shame exposed to everyone. He saw the humans gathering around her, not with horror but with admiration. He had spent his whole life believing that the marked ones were lesser, that their ridges were signs of imperfection, that they should be hidden away for the comfort of others. But these humans looked at Vela and saw something beautiful. Perhaps he had been wrong. Vela could not stay in the room any longer. The emotions were too strong, too overwhelming. She pulled her hand gently from Tae-sung's grip. Please excuse me, she said. Her voice was thick with tears. I need to go. She walked out of the hall, her torn uniform fluttering behind her. The humans let her go. They understood that she needed time. Tae-sung watched her leave, his heart aching for her. He wanted to follow, but he knew she needed space. She had just had her entire world turned upside down. She needed time to process it. Yuna came to stand beside him. That was a brave thing you did, she said. It was not brave, he said. It was just true. Sometimes the truth takes the most courage. He looked toward the door where Vela had disappeared. Do you think she will believe it? Really believe it? Yuna was quiet for a moment. I do not know, she admitted. She has carried this pain for a long time. It will not disappear in one night. She put a hand on his shoulder. But you gave her something she never had before. You gave her hope. Tae-sung nodded slowly. He thought of Vela's face when he called her beautiful. The shock, the disbelief, the tiny spark of something that might have been wonder. It was a beginning. That was all he could give her right now. But sometimes a beginning was enough. She told herself she was ill. She told herself she needed rest. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She was hiding. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the reception hall. She saw the faces of her people turning away from her. She heard the murmurs, felt the shame burning in her chest. But then she saw something else. She saw Tae-sung walking toward her. She heard his voice, clear and certain. Those patterns are beautiful. She did not know what to do with those words. They did not fit anywhere in her mind. They were like a key to a door she had never known existed. On the second day, someone knocked on her door. She did not answer at first, hoping they would go away. But the knocking continued, gentle but persistent. She opened the door to find Kim Yuna standing in the corridor with a tray of food. You need to eat, Yuna said simply. She walked past Vela into the room without waiting for an invitation. Vela stood by the door, uncertain. I am not hungry. Then sit with me while I eat, Yuna said. I hate eating alone. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Vela found herself sitting down anyway. Yuna ate slowly, talking about small things. The weather system they had passed through that morning. A funny thing that happened in the medical bay. The card game that Lieutenant Choi had lost badly last night. She did not mention the reception. She did not ask how Vela was feeling. Finally, when the food was almost gone, Vela spoke. "Dr. Kim, may I ask you something?" "Of course." Vela looked down at her hands. "Do humans truly find things like my ridges beautiful, or were you all just being kind?" Yuna set down her fork. She looked at Vela for a long moment before answering. "I will tell you something about humans," she said. "We are not a species that values sameness. We do not look at each other and wish we all looked identical. We are fascinated by differences, by the things that make each person unique." She pulled out her console and opened a folder of images. "Look at these. These are people that humans consider beautiful." Vela looked at the screen. She saw a woman with a face full of dark spots, a man with skin that had two different colors, a child with eyes that did not match, a dancer with a missing arm. "I do not understand," Vela said. "These are all marked, flawed." "No," Yuna said firmly. "They are different. And in human eyes, different is interesting. Different is valuable. Different is beautiful." Vela stared at the images. She thought about all the times she had been told to cover herself, to stay out of sight, to be grateful for any scrap of tolerance. She thought about the way her own mother had looked at her with sadness instead of love. And now this human doctor was showing her pictures of marked people and calling them beautiful. "I have spent my whole life being told I was ugly," Vela whispered. "How do I just stop believing that?" Yuna reached across the table and took her hand. "You do not stop believing it all at once. You start by questioning it. You start by looking at yourself and asking, what if they were wrong?" Vela's eyes filled with tears. "And what if they were not wrong? What if I let myself hope and then I find out that I really am what they always said?" "Then you will still have people who see you differently," Yuna said. "You will still have us." That evening, Vela walked to the observation deck. She needed to think, and somehow this room had become her place for thinking. She stood at the window and watched the stars drift past, her reflection faint in the glass. She did not hear Tae-sung enter until he spoke. "I was hoping I would find you here." She turned. He stood near the door, giving her space. His face was calm, but his eyes were worried. "I am sorry I did not come sooner," he said. "I wanted to give you time. You do not need to apologize." She turned back to the window. "You said nothing wrong." He walked closer, stopping beside her. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the stars. "I meant what I said," Tae-sung said quietly. "At the reception. I was not just trying to make you feel better. I was telling you the truth." "I know," she said. "That is what makes it so hard." He looked at her. "Why hard?" Vela took a breath. "Because if you are telling the truth, then everything I have believed about myself is a lie. And if everything I have believed is a lie, then I have wasted my whole life hiding from nothing." Tae-sung nodded slowly. "That is a painful thing to realize." "Yes." They were quiet again. The stars moved past, cold and distant and beautiful. "What do my ridges look like to you?" Vela asked suddenly. "When you see them, what do you think of?" Tae-sung considered the question carefully. "Rivers," he said, "seen from high above, the way they branch and spread across the land." He paused. "Or circuits, the patterns inside a machine carrying light and energy." He looked at her. "Or roots, growing deep into the earth, holding everything together." Vela felt her throat tighten. No one had ever described her that way. No one had ever made her ridges sound like something wondrous instead of shameful. "I do not know how to see myself that way," she said. "Then let me help you." He turned to face her fully. Tell me what you see when you look in the mirror." She shook her head. "I see what I was taught to see. Damage, wrongness. Something that should not be shown." "And what if you looked again?" he asked. "What if you tried to see what I see?" She met his eyes. In them she saw no pity, no discomfort, no polite lies. She saw only warmth and certainty. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I know," he said, "but you do not have to be afraid alone." She looked out at the stars again. She thought about the paintings he had shown her, the people with scars and marks who were called beautiful. She thought about Yuna's words. She thought about the humans at the reception, speaking up one by one to tell her that her ridges were wondrous. She had two choices. She could go back to her small, dark life and pretend this had never happened. She could return to being invisible, hidden, alone, or she could take a chance. She could try to see herself through new eyes. "I want to believe you," she said quietly. "I want to believe all of you, but I do not know if I can." "You do not have to believe it today," Tae-sung said. "You just have to stay open to the possibility. The rest will come with time." Vela looked at him. This human, who had no reason to care about her, who had nothing to gain from helping her. He looked at her and saw something beautiful. He looked at her and saw someone worth knowing. Maybe that was enough to start. "I will try," she said. He smiled. It was a warm smile, full of hope. "That is all I ask." They stood together at the window, watching the stars. And for the first time in her life, Vela did not wish she could disappear. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to believe that what they saw was worth seeing. The final day of negotiations arrived with a sense of history. After 3 weeks of talks, the treaty between humans and Kethri was ready to be signed. It was a moment that would change both species forever. The signing ceremony was held in the ship's great hall. Flags hung from the ceiling, human and Kethri side by side. Cameras recorded everything for the billions of people watching on both worlds. Every seat was filled with diplomats, officers, and witnesses. Tae-sung took his place near the front of the room. He looked toward the door, waiting. When Vela entered, the hall went silent. She wore traditional Kethri formal clothing, a flowing gown in deep blue that was reserved for important ceremonies. But unlike her previous uniforms, this gown did not hide her. The collar was low, showing the full pattern of ridges on her neck and collarbone. Her sleeves were short, revealing the spirals that ran down her arms. She had done nothing to cover or soften her markings. She walked into the room with her head held high. The Kethri delegates stared at her in shock. Elder Knox's eyes went wide. Several of them whispered to each other, their expressions ranging from disbelief to horror. But Vela did not look at them. She looked straight ahead, her face calm and steady. She walked to her place at the side of the room and stood there, visible to everyone. Tae-sung felt his heart swell with pride. He wanted to stand up and cheer, but he kept his composure. This was her moment, not his. The ceremony began. Captain Yoon and Elder Knox gave speeches about the importance of the treaty. They spoke of cooperation, respect, and the promise of a shared future. Vela translated every word, her voice clear and strong. She did not stumble. She did not hide. During a pause in the speeches, Tae-sung noticed movement near the back of the hall. A young Kethri aide, barely out of training, approached Vela quietly. The aide was female, with nervous eyes and a high collar that covered most of her neck. "Forgive me," the aide whispered. "I just wanted to say, what you are doing is brave." Vela looked at her. "What is your name?" "Seri." "Why do you think it is brave, Seri?" The young aide hesitated. Then, slowly, she pulled down the edge of her collar. Beneath it, barely visible, were the first curves of ridge patterns. "I hide mine," Seri said softly. Everyone tells me I am lucky they are small, but I am still ashamed of them. She looked at Vela with something like wonder. You are standing here with all of yours showing. You are not ashamed at all. Vela felt something shift in her chest. She had thought she was alone. She had thought she was the only one carrying this weight. But here was another marked one, young and frightened, and hiding just like Vela had hidden her whole life. I am still learning not to be ashamed, Vela said honestly, but I have learned something else. The shame was not mine to carry. It was put on me by people who did not understand. She reached out and touched the young aide's hand. You do not have to carry it either. Siri's eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly and returned to her place, but she stood a little taller than before. The ceremony continued. The treaty was signed with great formality, both leaders pressing their seals to the document that would bind their peoples together. Applause filled the hall. History had been made. As the crowd began to break apart, Elder Knox approached Vela. She stiffened, expecting criticism, but his expression was not angry. It was thoughtful. You made a statement today, he said. Yes, she agreed. I did. He was quiet for a moment. I have spent many years believing certain things about people like you, about what you are capable of, about what you deserve. He paused. These humans have made me question some of those beliefs. Vela waited. I am not saying you were right to display yourself this way, he continued. It goes against our customs. It made many of our people uncomfortable. I know, she said, but I am also not saying you were wrong. He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. You performed your duties perfectly today. You represented our people with skill and dignity, and you did it while showing all of yourself. He took a breath. Perhaps there is something to be learned from that. It was not an apology. It was not acceptance. But it was something. A crack in the wall. Thank you, Elder, Vela said. He nodded and walked away. Vela watched him go, feeling a mix of emotions she could not quite name. Tae Sung appeared at her side. What did he say? He said he is questioning things, she said. I do not think he will change completely, but he is thinking. That is a start. She turned to him. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, for making others see me, for giving me the courage to see myself. He smiled. You did the hard part. You chose to walk into this room with nothing hidden. That was all you. It was not all me, she said. I would not have done it without you. They stood together as the hall emptied around them. Humans and Kethri walked past, some nodding at Vela, others still looking away. But she did not mind the ones who looked away. She was not trying to make everyone accept her. She was just trying to accept herself. That evening, there was a final dinner for both delegations. Vela sat at the main table this time, not at the back of the room. She ate with the others and joined the conversation. Some of the Kethri were stiff with her, but a few were warmer than before. The young aide, Sari, smiled at her from across the room. After dinner, Vela returned to her quarters and stood in front of the mirror. She looked at her reflection, at the ridges that covered her face and neck and arms. She traced them with her fingers, feeling the familiar curves and patterns. For so many years she had hated what she saw. She had wished she could cut the ridges away, erase them, become smooth and normal and acceptable. But now, standing in this room on this ship so far from home, she tried to see what Tae Sung saw, what the humans saw: rivers, circuits, roots, art. She did not know if she fully believed it yet, but she did not look away. She did not wish to disappear. She looked at herself, and she did not hate what she saw. It was a small thing, but it was everything. She thought about going home, back to her small office and her lonely life. The thought filled her with dread. She did not want to return to being invisible, but maybe she did not have to. Maybe there was another way. She would think about it tomorrow. For now, She stood at the mirror and looked at herself with something that felt almost like hope. For the first time in her life, she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see herself as beautiful. The Kethri ship was docked and ready, its engines humming with power. The delegates gathered in the departure bay, saying their final goodbyes to the human crew. There were handshakes and bows, exchanges of gifts and promises to stay in contact. Vela stood apart from the others, her bag at her feet. She was dressed in her traveling clothes, her ridges visible as they had been since the signing ceremony. Some of the other Kethri still avoided looking at her, but she no longer minded. She had stopped seeking their approval. Taesung approached her. His face was calm, but she could see the sadness in his eyes. "So," he said, "you are leaving?" "Yes." She looked at the ship, then back at him. "The mission is over. It is time to go home." He nodded slowly. "What will you do when you get back? Return to your office?" She had thought about this question for days. She had imagined herself walking back into that small, dark room, sitting alone at her desk, translating documents that no one would ever see. The thought made her feel like she was drowning. "I do not want to go back to that life," she said. "I do not want to be invisible again." "Then do not go back." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "Captain Yoon asked me to give you this. It is a formal offer. The Unity needs a permanent liaison between humans and Kethri. Someone who knows both cultures, speaks both languages, and can help us understand each other better." He held out the chip. "She wants you." Vela stared at the chip. "Me? You are the best translator I have ever seen. You understand humans in a way that no other Kethri does. And you—" He paused. "You have a gift for making people feel seen, even people who have been invisible their whole lives." Her hand trembled as she took the chip. "I would have to stay here, on the human ship. Yes, away from my people, away from everything I know. Yes." He stepped closer. "But you would be seen, Vela. Every day you would be seen. You would never have to hide again." She looked at the chip in her hand. She thought about her home, the place where she had spent so many years being hidden and ashamed. She thought about this ship, where people looked at her ridges and called them beautiful. It was not a difficult choice. "I will stay," she said. Taesung's face broke into a smile. "Really?" "Yes." She smiled back, and this time she did not cover her mouth. "I want to be seen." He pulled her into a hug. It was sudden and warm and very human. Vela stiffened for a moment, then relaxed into it. She could not remember the last time someone had held her like this. Maybe no one ever had. Kim Yuna appeared at the edge of the bay, grinning. "Did she say yes?" "She said yes," Taesung called back. Yuna laughed and hurried over to join them. "Welcome to the crew," she said, clasping Vela's hands. "Welcome to the family." Vela felt tears prick her eyes. Family. She had never really had one of those, but maybe she did now. The Kethri ship departed an hour later. Vela stood at the window and watched it go, carrying her people back to their world. She felt a pang of something, sadness maybe, or nostalgia. That ship was taking away everything she had ever known, but it was also leaving her exactly where she wanted to be. 6 months passed. Vela became a fixture on the GSS Unity. She worked with Taesung on cultural exchanges and translation projects. She advised Captain Yoon on Kethri customs and helped resolve misunderstandings before they became conflicts. She ate meals with Yuna and played cards with Lieutenant Choi and learned to laugh without covering her mouth. She also began to change in other ways. She stood straighter. She spoke louder. She stopped waiting for permission to share her thoughts. The human crew treated her as an equal, and slowly, she began to believe that she was one. She still looked in the mirror every day, But now, when she traced the ridges on her face, she did not see flaws. She saw rivers and circuits and roots. She saw something unique, something that could not be copied or repeated. She saw art. One morning, a new Kethri delegation arrived at the ship. They were young diplomats, just beginning their careers, eager to learn about humans. Vela was assigned to greet them and show them around. She stood in the arrival bay as the airlock opened. The young Kethri walked through, looking around with curious eyes. Most of them had smooth, unmarked skin. But one of them, a young female near the back, had ridges. The ridges were not as extensive as Vela's, but they were visible, running along her forehead and down her cheeks. The young female kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. Vela knew that posture. She had spent most of her life in that same position. She walked toward the young female while the others moved on with the greeting party. She stopped in front of her and waited until the girl looked up. "What is your name?" Vela asked gently. "Mira," the girl whispered. "Welcome to the Unity, Mira." Vela smiled. "I am Vela. I will be helping you during your time here." Mira's eyes went to Vela's ridges, so clearly displayed. Her mouth fell open slightly. You do not hide them," she said. "No," Vela said. "I do not." "But how? Are you not ashamed?" Vela remembered when she would have said yes to that question, when she would have felt the shame burning in her chest, would have wished she could disappear into the floor, but she was not that person anymore. "I used to be ashamed," she said. "I spent many years believing I was ugly because of these patterns. But then I met humans, and they taught me something important." "What?" Mira asked. Vela reached out and lifted the girl's chin, making her stand straighter. "They taught me that beauty is not about being the same as everyone else. It is about being yourself, all of yourself, even the parts you were told to hide." She looked into Mira's frightened eyes. "You are beautiful, Mira, exactly as you are." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Vela the way Vela had once looked at Tai Sung, with disbelief and confusion and the tiniest flicker of hope. "I do not know if I can believe that," Mira whispered. "You do not have to believe it today," Vela said. "You just have to stay open to the possibility." Across the bay, Tai Sung watched the exchange. He saw Vela standing tall, saw the young girl looking up at her with wonder. He smiled. Vela had come so far. From the silent, hidden translator at the back of the room to this confident woman who lifted up others the way she had been lifted up. She had learned to see herself with new eyes, and now she was teaching others to do the same. That night, Vela stood at the window of the observation deck. The stars drifted past, endless and bright. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of hiding, the moment her collar tore, the human who looked at her and saw something beautiful. She thought about Mira and the other young Kethri who would come after her. She thought about the small crack that was forming in her people's beliefs, the questions that were beginning to be asked. Change would not come quickly. It would take years, maybe generations, but it would come. She believed that now. She looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw her ridges, delicate and intricate, glowing faintly in the starlight. She no longer needed others to call her beautiful. She had learned to see it herself.